Welcome to the Obvious Leadership Podcast, where we dive into practical leadership insights that are, well, obvious. Your hosts have walked the talk, and now they're sharing their knowledge, strategies, and advice. Let's jump into today's episode and explore the world of leadership with your hosts, Joey and Omar.
Man, we talked about last time. I think we mentioned talking about the learning process, and I kind of wanted to expand on that a little bit, right? So I know that I've done some research on how the learning process is, right? I know you talked about the example of listening to a movie, and you only really kind of gather about maybe 30 minutes of it. Yeah. Throughout the whole first sit down. And I mean, honestly, that's what really gives a lot of movies some rewatch value. You know what I mean? So I mean that's why when we watch a movie the second time, we notice things that we didn't notice, the first time, right? No, so it kind of goes back to it's the same thing like observations, I feel like, right? So observations, you can't do an observation once or twice after you teach somebody something. You got to do it multiple times to really understand, hey, where does this person need help and where are they excelling? Right.
Yeah, so it goes back to the building the habit. You can't just do it once and expect them to have a habit.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, people, you say observations and people always have a bad feeling about, well, you're going to observe me, oh my gosh, what's going on? But, it's the same thing I talked about with role plays, man. When you're doing a role play, nobody really wants to do it, right? Everybody's, kind of giving it half effort. But, if you're really, giving it your all and, trying to make it as real as possible, it can have some real benefits.
Yeah, big time. And I know and I don't know about your experiences, man, but I know when I first started doing those observations and paying attention to what my team was doing, they didn't know what was going on. So, at first it was kind of a little bit of a struggle because they thought it was I'm critiquing them in a bad way, instead of trying to give them feedback on things that I noticed that they could do differently, right? And it goes down the way you approach the observation is going to depend on your employee's personality. That's why it's important for you as a leader to know who your people are, right? And it's kind of cliche to say you got to know what motivates your team. You do really have to have an understanding. And I'm not saying okay, yeah, they're motivated. They want to work here because they want to make money. Well, no duh, Sherlock.
Right.
If everybody could not have to work, it'd be a different kind of conversation you'd be having because they'd actually enjoy what they're doing. Right. But being able to give them a reason, because obviously they applied to work there instead of all the other places they could have applied. You hired them for a reason. And we want to keep them because we put in that time and effort to bring them on board. So do them a favor, observe their behaviors, and help out on what they could do better. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people do when doing observations of their sales teams is they give them this plethora, these are all the different things. It's no, pick one thing, one actionable item in your observation that they could do better. That's going to be a foundation that will help out the other things that that they could have improved on.
Right? Yeah. And I think when you lead with one thing that you can focus on, I think it also opens the door for what they did well on, right? Because that's one thing also forgotten when you go through the observation, man. It's you're sitting there and you're beating somebody down with if you have this plethora of stuff that you're talking about that they need to work on, man, it's just it becomes overwhelming for the employee, and also it just sets a bad connotation for the next time that you have an observation plan to do for them.
Oh yeah. And what I've done in the past, this has been something that I picked up from not just different leaders, but the way that I do it in particular is from a book called The Coaching Method. It's actually got a longer title than that, but if you search the coaching method, you'll find it. And it goes through it. It literally is like almost like a scientific method, right? It's a guy who did research on like the better ways to like coach and train employees. And one of my biggest tenets has always been to not be the person that tells you, like, I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to hold your feet to the fire if you're just essentially trying to jerk me around and go in a circle, not try to take responsibility for your actions, good or bad. I'm going to hold your feet to the fire and be like, okay, let's try this again, right?
Yeah.
But the way I would do my observations, the way I've done them, is all right, cool. Let's talk real fast about that that interaction you just had, and I'm not the one who's going to be explaining what I saw, right? I'm going to be like, okay, I want you to tell me how you feel you did during that interaction, and after you tell me, or after we go through that, I'll tell you, kind of what I saw. And the reason I do it is I want them to point out what they did well, and I want them to point out where they feel they could have done something better, right?
Right.
I want them to take that responsibility. And the biggest thing I've seen personally from leaders, from managers that are trying to learn this method is I got to jump in and I got to be the one that tells you, like, you're not telling me fast enough. You're not getting to the point fast enough. And it's like, that's a coaching thing. Like, they're going to learn that. They don't know how to do it yet. So you got to have the patience and the skills to help teach them that. And the biggest thing that this book has taught me, what else? Literally that phrase. So like, say, Joy, you and I are having a conversation about an observation, right? Interaction you just had with the client. And I turn to you and I'm like, hey, Joy, so what'd you do? And you're like, oh, this is what I did. Okay. What else? Like, if I'm not getting that response that I'm looking for, right? Or like you're still holding back, the what else and shut up method makes you uncomfortable. So you're trying to fill in that space. You're going to keep talking.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's definitely important, man, to open that conversation, because when it's coming from the employee, you have full buy-in, right? Because it's their thoughts, it's their words that is coming out into the world now. And, it's what is driving that conversation, man. So if it's coming from them, they're all like, they are tuned into what is going on, right? If it's coming out of their mouth, they are completely bought into what is coming out of their mouth, versus when it's coming from your mouth, they may have walls put up already. Be like, oh man, this guy's always talking about, how I'm not doing this, blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? It's so easy for them to turn off like what you're trying to say, versus you're right, man. If it's coming from them, like there's so much more of an impact that can be had with that interaction.
Yeah, big time. And that's always an issue with like leaders trying to find ways to, observe and coach and train up their teams is, well, I'm the leader, I'm the manager, I'm the one who knows everything, right? Knows everything.
Yeah.
Do this, and this. It's like, yeah, but that's not how you actually improve, because you don't know what they do know and what they don't know and what they don't understand. You don't know where they're coming from. And when you tell them, they could say, oh, I forgot. Right. And that happens often. Like, oh yeah, I forgot to do that. I forgot to do that. Yeah, I'll try it next time. There's no accountability from their end. And that's where, like, being a leader really is being almost like a professor in psychology, because there literally is different psychological little habits and principles that you end up having to use to ensure that your team gets trained correctly and that they're doing everything. Because the biggest thing is they got to, like you said, they got to have that buy-in. They got to take responsibility for what they're doing. And that only comes from within.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, man. You can try and pound a message into somebody, like over and over and over again, but until they believe it, they're not gonna take what you're saying, I feel like the thing with coaching, man, and doing those observations is, it first starts with the expectation. You have to set expectations of what you're going to be doing during that observation, right? Are you willing? So is that person okay with you jumping in to help them in a certain situation that notice through the interaction? And are they okay with you kind of jumping in and helping them through a situation? Or like I guess what this conversation is going to, like, it needs to be catered to maybe what they want. You should have had a conversation, or maybe you've done like like informal observations before, right? And you kind of have an idea of what are the habits of this person, where are some areas that they struggle. It shouldn't be, well, I've never met this person before, and I'm gonna I'm gonna just try and figure out, oh man, like, what are they good at, what are they not good at? I mean, it should be a time where you do notice some things that maybe you haven't realized before, but it should be a time where you can kind of solidify some things, and maybe set that expectation with them beforehand, that, hey, look, if it's okay with you, maybe I'll jump in and help you through a situation.
Yeah. And it goes to like knowing your team, right? It goes back to that. You got to spend that time observing. And honestly, in my opinion, I think most observations should be informal, right? Because you're doing some other task and you just happen to see them. So you're going to kind of like hover around a little bit to kind of see what they're doing, right? And then you'll have time when you do like formal ones, like, all right, Bob, this next time, the next time you have a customer, I'm gonna stick around. That way they get more comfortable with knowing that, okay, you're going to be doing observations, so I don't become nervous as the seller. Because the first few times they are going to be nervous. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what to do. And also on your end as a leader, you might be a little bit nervous because you're like, okay, should I jump in? Should I step in? Do I need to correct right here? And obviously you want to be hands off. You need to learn to like let them do it, and then you do the observation. Now, if it's going completely horrible, that's a different story, but there's ways to segue in without being rude or like interrupting their flow, right? Because you never know what's actually going on throughout the interaction.
Yeah.
And also, as a leader, especially starting off, you want to showcase the behaviors. So you got to be up center. You got to be front and center and be almost the show and interact with clients and customers. I know what I've done in the past is when I walked into a store, I was like, all right, I'm going to, for the first few minutes, I'm going to see if I can help out a customer. And I'm going to model the behaviors that I was talking about and what I have been talking about. And I'm not going to sell it, but I'm going to model it to the point where they're sold and it just needs to be transacted. And at that point, all right, cool. I'm going to pass it off to, Bob will be here and he'll go ahead and get you finished up. And yeah, Bob may have been there throughout the whole time or like been listening in, but I'm going to turn to Bob and I'm going to explain to him, all right, what we've been doing. So he, the customer feels, okay, cool. This person understands what we're doing. And I'll pass them off and be like, all right, so you just got to check them out, get them taken care of with this and that, and boom, we're on our way, right? And then I'll go do whatever I needed to do.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important, man, because if you can model that behavior, I'm definitely a believer in, what they see is, what they're gonna do, right? Because you are their role model for, how they should be doing things, how they should be handling customers in different situations. So
hands down.
I think it goes back to that whole thing. I know they say you don't know what you don't know until you know that you don't know it.
Yeah.
Right. But I think there's different levels to that. You know what I mean? Like, so you don't know what you don't know. And then you know that you don't know, right? Then you need to find out what how to do what you don't know.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And then you know what you know. Now you know that you know it, right?
Yep.
But then what you know becomes a habit. And now you really don't know that you know it, but you do it. Right? Because it's so ingrained in you, right? And I feel like that's what experience is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, yeah. There's it it's like almost it's the I forgot what the actual name is, but it's almost like there's 4 levels of uh subconscious knowing, right? Uh you have the first level, which is you don't know anything, and subconsciously you don't know it, right? There's the next step where you consciously know it, but subconsciously you don't, meaning that you have to really put focus on it. And it's not like if you don't think about it, you're automatically going to do it. You have to have a mindset to say, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing.
Yeah.
The next step is you know it, and like subconsciously you start picking it up. And then the last step is you know it consciously, and also you know it subconsciously, right? So no matter what, even if you're not thinking about it, you automatically do it. And that's what you see in your pro athletes, people that have been doing a particular sport for many, many years. The reason why they train on the basics, right, is they don't have to think about that when they're in the game, right? They constantly train and train and train, retraining during the off season, in between games, to make sure that they know the plays and the routes are going to be doing, so that they don't have to mentally think about it. They know, okay, boom, this is happening. Their body automatically does it. It's also one of the reasons why in military you have them run the same drills over and over again, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those where you need to drill in the basics so that you don't have to think about the basics when it actually comes to game time, to the real action.
Yeah, so I think one more thing on observations as well, right? So I don't know about in your experience, but man, a lot over the last couple of years where we were doing observations on our employees, they would always want me to fill out a form, right? And so that form is about a full 1-pager, right? And it turns into me listening for the things on the form than it is really listening to the interaction, right? So I feel like it's less impactful, and it's also less about what that employee needs. It's more about what the company wants you to do, right? So It's not necessarily talking about the growth of the individual. It's talking about, hey, how are you not using this interaction to grow our company? You know what I mean? But when really, if we focus on the individual, right? We focus on the individual and we make sure that they are growing where they need to, that's going to then impact our growth as a company.
Yep. I've been in that point where we have like a form to fill out, like a 1-pager, and you submit it. And the issue becomes that a lot of leaders that aren't actually doing training are going to see this as just a task to check off. So they're going to rush through it and, all right, Joey, tell me about, just tell me an interaction, or I'm just going to fill it in as though, because I already know you, right? And it's like, you're not doing your team a service at all by doing that. You're doing a complete disservice. But I also get it, because to your point, you're not really paying attention to what's going on. Really, you're just trying to check certain things off. Did he say this? Yes. Okay, cool. And like, I get it, right? I get it that 90% of the issue is, bringing it up, right? If you at least bring it up, then you can at least have an objection to it. But the issue becomes, how do you bring it up, right? If you just bring it up real fast in passing, if you bring it up at the register once they're ready to check out and they don't want to hear anything because they've already been closed, like at that point, you're not really doing much training, much coaching. You're just checking off a checklist to get it done to be in compliance.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I used to get in trouble a lot because those coaching forms, I just didn't like it. First of all, it was intimidating to walk around with a clipboard, right? And always be searching for somebody to observe, right?
Yeah.
And you know that everybody's kind of, like you said, nervous, right? And they're on their toes, just trying to be like, okay, well, what is he gonna do? What is he gonna say, right? Is he behind me now? What is he writing down something? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I found that if I was just out and about on the sales floor, constantly listening and constantly giving in the moment feedback, right, that was semi-informal,
Yep.
then they'd be a little bit more open to, hey man, you're like, do you mind if I come and sit next to you so I get a little bit more, I can learn a little bit more about what you do for our customers, through your daily interactions, right? And
Yeah.
you set the expectation that way. And, maybe if it's, if it's okay with you, and I always lead with, if it's okay, I can give you some feedback on maybe how I would have how I would have improved the situation. But like you said, that's after they've already given us their take on the interaction, right? Hey, look, what do you think went well? And then what do you think you can improve on?
Yeah. And like the whole point, right, is you want them to get comfortable with it. So find also interactions where they do well in, right? Point out those interactions where, oh man, you did solid here. Maybe they didn't get everything right, but you did your part, right? And in sales, like I told you, right, going back to one of our other podcasts, one of my favorite quotes in sales is that Anchorman scene where 60% of the time it works every time.
Yep.
And that's the exact same point. You're giving that interaction in that coaching session. It's like, hey, you did everything you could. You brought it up. You did great. Okay, they didn't buy this time, right? Not everybody's always going to buy from you at that moment, right? There are certain reasons why they say no. May not be the right time, may not be this or that. But the way you brought it up was great. Keep doing it, right? Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing solid. You're going to close them. And that's the whole point is in sales, we want to increase a little bit. You're not looking for an overnight, oh yeah, I did, 100% better overnight. There's major red flags if that happens. But the power of, I think I brought this up, or I think you and I talked about this, but the power of just 1% change daily, just getting 1% better every single day is such a phenomenal thing. Like most people think, oh, well, that's, if I get 1% better every single day for every single day that I work, I'll be like 200% better. It's like, no, that's not actually how that works. It's actually exponential, not additive, right?
Yeah.
So you would be like almost 1,000 times better, right? 1,000% better, because you're building off of your previous self, and that previous self is 1% better than the day before, right? So whatever skill set you want to improve on, just putting a little bit of effort into that every single day will actually go a long way. And I'm not asking you to be, top person. We got to get you to this level because you know what, Joey, this is where you told me you wanted to be at. And I'm going to hold you accountable. You're telling me you want to be at this level. This is where you want to perform. This is when you want to be able to achieve. I'm going to hold you to that, because then I go from being the, almost a bad guy trying to hold you to company standards to, no, you told me you wanted to be better. This is where you want to be at. This is where I'm going to hold you to it. And if you don't want to be held to that anymore, then let's have a conversation and see where you do want to be at. Maybe you want to be higher. Maybe, it's a little bit more stressful than what you thought and you want to kind of bring it down a notch. Let's talk about what that means. Right.
Well, I think that those coaching forums could also kind of relate to what you're talking about, right? Because if that person wants to be 1,000 times better, maybe that coaching forum isn't going to get them there, right? And let's say that they are a very experienced salesperson, and you're sitting here going off of a coaching forum. You're not necessarily catering your coaching to what that person's skill set is, right? So you're leaving a lot on the table, and then also, to be honest, like if they're one of your best salespeople, because they also do need observations as well, right? Let's be honest. But yeah, and that's not to say anything bad, but also it's a time where you can learn some of the good things and take that innovation that they've brought into their interactions, because obviously it's working, and translate that to some of your other guys, right? So and then also, like we talked about in the last episode, man, is like maybe they can teach what they're learning, right? So you bring up like, man, I love this thing that you're doing during the interactions. Like it'd be great if you can teach that to the team. And I'm like, how great would that make them feel?
Oh yeah, big time. And when you start seeing that, I mean, you start seeing leadership like really take a hold of that individual. And then they may not say it out loud, right? And they may not even know it, but they're now moving themselves into like a leadership role. And they may not be ready for it at that point, right? I know I've had an employee, amazing seller, like he was very young, very after it. He was very goal oriented, still is actually. And he's very about, this is what I'm going to achieve. This is what I'm going to get done. All right, cool. And early on, he wanted to get into like a manager role. He wanted to get into a leadership role. And I was like, all right, now that means you also need to like help out with non-selling tasks.
Yeah, right.
Right. So that means it's going to take time away from the sales floor for you to accomplish it. So you need to understand what you're asking for. And he's like, yeah. And then he would think about it. And he's like, no. So eventually I did make him an assistant manager. And he had to learn. He wasn't always happy with, man, I can't be on the sales floor. I'm losing money. I was like, yeah. And this is what leadership is. Like, you have to now go past being a salesperson to, actually be a leader, to lead your team to success. So knock out, you need to learn how to time manage your day and prioritize what you need to get done, when you need to get it done by, so that you could be on the sales floor for your selling time and actually focus on selling and helping the rest of the team move forward, because the team does well when they see you selling. I'm not going to deny that. But, if you're going to step into that manager role, there's also these additional tasks, these admin tasks that have to get done.
Right.
And it's in your responsibility to do that. So they need to understand, you have to have that conversation, because the worst thing, and I've seen this before, just moving a seller into a leadership role, into a management role, and then letting that location or that team go to trash because they don't know how to do all the admin stuff, or even how to prioritize their time or the administrative stuff they need to get done. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a whole different topic, man. We can talk about time management and how to prioritize, because yeah, man, like as a leader, you're having to make this decision like, hey, like I know what needs to be done for my people, but also the company wants me to do something in a certain amount of time and it needs to get done. Yep. So it's like, what do I do? Like, well, do I prioritize my people? Do I prioritize my company? Right. So, man, like that's like I said, I think that's a great topic for another discussion, man. But when it comes to observations, I think the time to do observations is when we have customers. You know what I mean? I think that should be first priority.
And that's when you're going to be in the moment where things are going to be fresh, so that you can have that conversation, right? Now, yeah, if you're busy and you got a bunch of people that you got to get through, right? If you're observing somebody, jot down some information, right? Like things you notice, that way it can be refresher for you once you go in, but you want to be able to try to get that to that person as soon as possible, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the only way. Like, why am I going to talk to you about an observation I did 3 days ago?
Mm-hmm.
Like, by that point, you've probably gone through tens, if not hundreds of customers that you've interacted with. Like, are you really going to remember that individual? I jotted down notes. I didn't tell you about it. Even if I told you about it, are you still going to remember that customer unless it was like a really bad or like a really great interaction?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, honestly, man, it's kind of one of my quote unquote bad habits that I picked up as being a manager, right? Because like I said, I thought I was super awkward walking around with a clipboard, right? Mm-hmm. But, one of my bad habits was always giving feedback in the moment. You know what I mean? Like, hey, look, I know you just finished with that customer. I think you did a great job with blah, 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 blah. Starting a conversation, just around whatever it is that I thought that they did good. And then, like I said, maybe I'd ask a little bit of, a question to them about, hey, what do you think you could have done better? Or, hey, have you thought about maybe doing this? Something just really quick in between customers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then what you do is go and notate it, right? So the exact opposite of sometimes what people do is taking notes, walking around with that clipboard, and they took notes, but they never find the time to go and give that feedback. And like you said, it doesn't mean anything 3 hours later. Right. Or even 30 minutes later, that they're like, I don't know what customer talking about. You know what I mean? Like, who, like, what did I do? But like, if you do it in the moment, It's very impactful, but also, like I said, you're prioritizing that person versus, essentially filling out that form, right? I mean, yes, you do need to do your job. If that is a requirement of your job, that's what you need to do, right? But, if you get in the habit of doing it all the time, then maybe you have a little bit more to go off of, right?
Yep.
Maybe you do a couple interactions on one sheet, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be one, but it's those things that you're observing that they need to get better at, right? So I think it's definitely important, man, just to go through, give those people the in the moment feedback, because like you said, it loses its luster after a certain period of time.
Yeah, big time. And it's got to be fresh, right? It's got to be real. Um, as a person who's had leaders underneath them that needed to get this stuff done, yeah, I get it. Some of them are going to fall behind, and you're going to know which of your leaders really do it and which of your leaders are, pencil whipping it. And you're going to have that. And listen, as a leader that, say you're a market leader, you're a director, you're a district, an area manager, that is going to be a behavior you want to correct. But the fact that they're doing the observations is going to be a move forward, right? And then you just got to ensure that observations are being done correctly, because your leaders got to understand why it's important. And you have to correlate that, whether it's correlating it to their favorite sports teams, whether it's correlating it to, their favorite video game or things like that, right? You start off at level 1 and then you work your way up, and it takes a while to get there, right? But unless you're actually not playing it right, you're not going to, or if you have the game, but you never played it, which is pencil whipping, like you're not going to do anything well with it. It's just wasted time, wasted material.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
And so this is, you being a district manager, right? I used to get this question all the time. How do I know you're doing observations if you're not filling out those forms? I used to get that question all the time. How would you respond? How would you respond to that?
So it's the way I would, and it's just like that, right? Like, hey, Joey, you know what? I'm looking through, I see your performance is great on the team, but I'm also seeing that we're not getting the observations done. So is your team able to perform without you, or are they performing because of you? Right. When you're doing the observations, I know that you're actually spending time with your team. So I can be able to correlate that to my leadership that, hey, the team does well, not because of just the location, but the leader here is actually really doing their observations. Now I can obviously take a look at, the observations and be able to tell if it was pencil whipped or not. Because there's always telltale trails that will tell you this was pencil whipped in a rush, or this is an actual observation, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing that I would be able to tell that by is the interactions in the store. So like, say you are doing that and I'm paying a visit and I'm just like, all right, Joey, do what you normally do. I just got to take care of a few things. I'm also paying attention to what you're doing. So as I'm there and I see you interacting with your team and I see you giving them feedback, I'm also going to relate that to you and be like, hey, Joe, pull you aside. I thought you gave some really good feedback. I like that. Can you walk me through, why that kind of feedback isn't, what I'm seeing over here on this end?
Yeah.
Right. And it just be a matter of me as a leader guiding you to do the same thing, just like you would with your team. Because if you're not doing it as a leader, the way my leadership is looking at it isn't that you're doing anything wrong. It's that me as a leader, I am not holding you accountable to it. So that falls on me.
Right.
That's not your failure. That's my failure as a leader now. So I need to make sure that, yes, that is corrected, but I want you to see why it's a good thing to be able to do that in, the way the company's asking for it. Right.
Yeah. And, so I think, and that's one of the things, like, I'd always get a phone call. Like if I missed, we used to have to fax those things over, man. Like, hey, and blah, blah, blah. And, sometimes I'd be able to send some, sometimes I wouldn't. I'd get a call the next day. Hey, man, you need to send over your stuff by so-and-so time. And I'm like, hey, I appreciate you reminding me. But, I said, like, I did do observations yesterday, and unfortunately, it just didn't cover anything that was on those observations forms. So we came to an understanding that she said, well, even if you turn the form over and make some notes about what you noticed on the other side, I'm okay with that. And man, so like that was super powerful for me to be like, you know what, maybe she does understand that I am doing it and she believes me. And so that's what I started doing, man. Like a lot of times for my in the moment coaching, I just find a piece of paper, sticky, whatever, man. And I just jot it down right after I had that little conversation, and I'd generate draft emails, right? And I'd put those things together about like what we talked about just real quick. I'd go and notate it, what we talked about, and then I'd print them out, after a couple of days, attach it to the back of a form, and I'd fax over the front part, fax over the back part, which was the drafted email of the observations. And man, she loved it. She was like, that's awesome, man. She's like, this is way more than what I'm asking for, but she's like, at least, you're completing that activity and making it effective. Right. And she, honestly, I never got a lot of grief for it because we were always performing.
Yep.
But it has to do with always being available to coach. Right. And in those times that they need it. So,
not to cut you off, bro, but yeah, I think we're coming to that mark. So cool. We'll leave off here. We'll pick it up on our next show. Right. Guys, thanks for stepping in.
And that brings us to the end of today's Obvious Leadership episode. Remember, every great leader starts with one step, and you're already on your way. Small changes lead to significant impact. Until next time, keep leading with purpose, and remember that leadership is the key to unlocking extraordinary results.